So today is about the new patrol boat in Battlefield 6, the CB90. The weaponry, how best to play it, the pros and cons, what maybe still needs to be improved, etc. I saw that there's a certain disagreement about it on the net. I've tested it extensively over the past few days, weighed all the weapons against each other, and so on and so forth. All of that in this video, and by the end, you will definitely know what's what with the new patrol boat in Battlefield 6. First, a bit of the basics. This thing is not a tank of the seas. You should definitely be aware of that when you play this thing. You don't have a whole lot of health, which means pushing in really aggressively is usually not a really good idea. It is like with most vehicles in Battlefield 6, unfortunately, in quotation marks, you have to proceed with caution, play a bit more defensively, not too aggressively, because the thing is also relatively sluggish. That means you also don't get away particularly quickly if you get attacked, and in most cases you're then simply dead. Therefore, you have to prepare your strategies a bit, play a bit more carefully, and ideally be a bit away from the coast usually, so that rocket launchers, etc. can't reach you well. I even tried putting the mechanics rocket intercept system on the boat to maybe put another layer of defense on the boat against attack jets and so on. Unfortunately, doesn't work. You can, unfortunately, cross that out. Alright, now let's first talk about the weaponry, because that's naturally what most are probably interested in. And after that, a bit about maybe some tactics, etc. Let's get to the main cannon, and there are already a few problems there because we have the autocannon and the Gatling. At the beginning of the test, I would have said definitely autocannon, and in the vast majority of cases I would stick to that too. But there's one thing that is really good about the Gatling, and that is that you can shoot enemy torpedoes out of the water with it, so make them explode when they swim towards you. That's extremely helpful actually. I tried it with the autocannon too, because I thought if you can destroy them, then it must work with the autocannon as well. I couldn't do it. I really tried for a long time trying to blast those torpedoes out of the water over and over again. It just didn't work. For me, it only worked with a Gatling. And since everyone will be playing these torpedoes sooner or later anyway, I'll get to that in a second, why is it even a good idea to play the Gatling? For this reason. Defense against boats is better with a Gatling, against helicopters too. You can aim a bit better, it's kind of logical. Now you might think to yourself, oh, then I'll just always play the Gatling. But the autocannon is also good against, for example, infantry that quickly hides behind rocks, because that happens relatively fast. And against that you also have a bit of splash damage on top of that. You can do a lot with this splash damage in situations like at B in the bay, for example, if you just blast at a point. Plus, you obviously also do a bit of damage to tanks with the thing. Those are the advantages of the autocannon. It really depends on the situation which primary weapon is the best one right now. I would say in the vast majority of cases, it's the autocannon. But there can also be situations where the Gatling is better, like against ships, for example. If torpedoes come swinging towards you, you can shoot them down. However, the problem is, in the time you're shooting down the torpedoes, the other boat is naturally already shooting at you with its main cannon. It's a bit tricky, actually. So it's basically best to dodge torpedoes, which isn't that easy though, if the guy on the other boat knows what he's doing a bit. So maybe you have to decide, depending on how the round goes. If you notice there's a good boat driver, then you might have to maybe even switch the main weapon actually. But in most cases, I would stick with the autocannon, I think. Because splash damage has another advantage due to the fact that the boat sways very heavily in the waves. And in most cases, you will be somewhere a bit further away from the coast, as I just said. And there it is, of course, better if you don't have to hit the infantry exactly with your shots, but you can also shoot slightly next to them and still do damage. So, like I said, in most cases, I think I would stick with the autocannon. But the Gatling is not as useless as you might think at first, especially because of this torpedo thing, for example. Then, of course, there's the secondary weapon, and here there's really no debate what we can take there. So, by default, the lock missiles, meaning the totally normal Stinger-like rockets with which you can target aircraft. They are then locked, you shoot them, they flare, and they are gone. So those are the standard things. I wouldn't use them as soon as you have unlocked the SKR-70 rockets, because it is almost a bit overpowered. It says that it's a guided missile so that you can guide it. That is also the case until it's right before the target, because then it transforms into a locking missile like that. I think they did that because it is relatively difficult to hit aircraft on the swaying sea. The last, I don't know, 2 seconds of the flight, depending on how the plane or the helicopter is moving, it then locks on and then it immediately finds its target. In most cases, the aircraft have no chance to flare there anymore, because I experienced that once in a plane, I think it was. You get, I think, 2 or 3 beeps before the missile hits you. So you barely have a chance to fend it off. It is almost a bit overpowered, I must say. But yeah, that's just how it is right now. Maybe it will get nerfed a little bit. The thing is, if you hit, it does 600 to 650 damage, I think. That means the aircraft have a direct mobility hit and they spin out. And in a whole lot of cases, though I'll put it this way, 70 to 80% of the cases, they also crash directly and then they are dead. So those things are an absolute must-have once you've unlocked them. And that's going to get really annoying when the boats all have them. I already know that as a flying person. And suddenly a transport helicopter isn't even that dangerous anymore as it has been so far. Because you hit it once for 600 damage, then you shoot it a bit more with your Gatling, or it just crashes anyway because it's spinning. Planes are the same. The attack jet flies at you. They are definitely your biggest enemy on the map. You hit them once and basically they actually crash right next to you into the sea. So very often that works really well, and the SKR-70 rockets definitely take them. And on top of that, it's a guided rocket. That means you can also use it against tanks or other boats, because you just guide it onto them completely normally then. Just does a bit of additional damage, like 200. So it's kind of an all-around rocket. Really, really good. For the equipment slot for the driver, there are the torpedoes or the mines. There it is clear to me, and 100% clear actually, definitely the torpedoes. You have to gear up for boat versus boat combat first. The secondary weapon isn't about anything else, because there are no weapons that you can use for anything else. It's simply just about other boats, whether they drive into the mines now or whether you actively shoot the torpedoes. And the torpedoes are ultra strong against boats, because if you hit them both, the other ship is down immediately. Who shoots first wins most of the time. They are super dangerous when you shoot them. They are quite slow, but you can also shoot them nicely forward. You have to lead them a bit, so you can't shoot directly at the boat, at least if it's moving logically. So we can actually keep that relatively short in the video. Torpedoes, definitely. It's quite funny sometimes when someone drives into your mines when you lay them, but as soon as the other boat has torpedoes, you're screwed in a fight. Then let's get to the gunner position, the mortar. First of all, if you are the driver and you have a gunner, you should always position yourself slightly sideways in an angle to the target. So never shoot exactly straight at another boat or at a point where people are, because in direct fire, the gunner cannot shoot past your canopy. So you can't shoot straight ahead unless it's in a high arc as a mortar, but not in direct fire, which is important in a fight. That's why it is important to position yourself at an angle to the target so that the gunner can also shoot at things. And once you are into it a bit, or rather you gunner and are a bit practiced in the matter, the thing does substantial damage too. Actually, against boats too, it's a good thing. You even hit helicopters with the thing, so you shouldn't underestimate that. And if you coordinate a bit, maybe are in the boat with your buddy, it works quite well. Now, the mortar has a function, and that is you can determine the flight trajectory. That means when you are not in direct fire mode, but in this mortar function where you shoot via the map, or rather the line, right? So you will probably pay attention to the minimap a lot. There are 3 different flight trajectories for this, or actually 4, meaning high, medium, low, and direct. That means, for example, in the high flight trajectory, you can shoot behind things the best. If you have a mountain standing in front of you, then logically direct fire doesn't work. That is what mortars are there for after all, that you can also get behind things. You can shoot behind it in that high arc. Depending on what kind of flight trajectory you have, it takes longer for the shells to arrive, and it takes really long. So in the high flight trajectory, it can easily take up to 15 seconds. That is almost a bit long, I think. Whether you could maybe work on that a bit. Dice, to make that whole thing a bit more useful would be worth considering. So even in that low flight trajectory, if you shoot a bit far, it takes around 10 seconds until the shells are there. So that is really long. It is not that easy to get kills with it, but there is a little trick you can use. Namely, when you shoot in the high arc, so to speak, it takes, let's say, 13 seconds. Then you immediately switch to the medium flight trajectory, shoot again, it takes like 10 seconds. Then immediately switch to the low flight trajectory, shoot again, always at the same point, and the shells arrive basically at the same time. So then you have 6 shots that arrive over an area simultaneously. That is pretty cool for once. When the enemy team is capturing a point, for example, logically everyone takes cover when the first shells hit, but this way you can manage to make all the shells basically arrive at the same time. This is pretty cool, I think. How useful that is, we have to figure out over time then, but it works. Just as a little tip. Otherwise, we also have various shells as secondary armament. We always have the high explosive rounds anyway. That is also what you will use the most as a gunner, but we still have secondary ammo, so to speak. There are a few different ones there. There are the smoke shells, which I find almost useless. First, it takes way too long until they get there. Well, in direct fire, it doesn't. You can't even shoot them at yourself, which could be maybe cool too, as another form of defense, so to speak. I honestly wouldn't use them very much. Then there is the guided high explosive rounds. With those you can shoot at a vehicle, for example, that is targeted with the laser or the soul flam and so on. But for that, someone in your team would also have to target it for that long. So as I said, sometimes it takes 10 to 15 seconds until a shell gets there. That happens quite rarely. So you also have to be exactly in the right spot there. So as long as you don't coordinate with a buddy who does that, I wouldn't use them, because otherwise it is really very, very, very random until someone does that. A bit more useful are actually the airburst shell, especially against aircraft, in case a heli gets too close to you, because they simply explode near helicopters and also near the ground then. So they are just airburst shells like that. I think everyone knows what that is. That means we don't have to hit the helicopter directly, because it is relatively difficult with the modder thing, because the shells fly relatively slow, and that way you can simplify it a bit, so to speak. So airburst shells aren't bad at all. They naturally also do a bit of splash damage if you use them on land against infantry. And then there's the elimination shell, and those are basically flares, like we know them from the sniper in Battlefield 5, for example. So I shoot them up on a parachute, then a flare like that flies down and spots people underneath it. That is actually very useful, I find. So I think I would decide between airburst and elimination, depending on whether you prefer to be helpful and spot, or maybe want one more chance against helicopters, because those are some of your biggest enemies as a boat driver. So who are your biggest enemies? Well, I would rank them, if they are there, other attack boats, definitely. Then comes the little bird. If that thing is near you, you are almost dead already. It is ultra strong unless you can happen to shoot your rocket directly at it. The problem is you often don't hear it coming, and yeah, it doesn't take long and you're actually dead. And attack jets, those are your main enemies, I would say, for the boats. The transport helis, not so much anymore if you got the SKR-70. So you should take those out as quickly as possible when you see them, and not waste time with anything else. And what is actually a good tactic often too is simply disappear. I'm telling you quite honestly, also not backwards but forward, and drive a curve to bail out. When you are being shot at by rockets, for example, or something from land, often just disappear. Bail out, tuck your tail in, and maybe plan a new attack, because the boats are simply dead way too quickly. We have way too little health. They don't withstand enough against MGs. That is also a huge point of criticism that I would have there. So I think they should have at least twice as much health. The thing goes down a bit too fast for me. But that is a general problem with vehicles anyway. Therefore, it somehow fits into the narrative of Battlefield 6 again. But yeah, in my opinion, too little health, or rather, it simply takes too much damage from normal MGs too. Another little fun fact on the side for all the engineers among you: you shouldn't play the MBT law against boats, because it doesn't lock onto the boat. The rocket flies right past it and simply ignores it. Javelin works, everything else guided, naturally too, but the MTB law does not work on boats, just on a side note. One very important thing at the end, because you have a passive ability in the boat, you can become a mobile spawn point. Not many people know that yet. I already said it in the last video, in the first one about Zero Reef, and I've already made a short about it, but I believe that the information simply has to be spread further because many don't use it. You have a ramp in front of the boat, and when you drive your snout onto a beach or a pier, it works on A and B2 for example, at this little harbor area, then your ramp in the front goes down and the hatch opens and you are a mobile spawn point for all of your team. That means even if you are fully occupied, meaning gunner and driver, people can spawn directly on you. That is actually extremely good for getting a few people onto a point that you want to capture. I would use that often. However, only if you are really sure that there maybe aren't many enemies in the vicinity. Because as I already said, the boat is relatively sluggish, and when you get shot at, you often don't get away fast enough. That is a bit problematic. But you always have to keep that in mind, that you are a mobile spawn point too. Also, a little fun fact, but I think it is extremely important and has to be spread too, that you should always be on the lookout on the map whether some boat is maybe currently a spawn point at an enemy point. One thing that also happens often is if you are fighting against a boat, basically have it down, shoot it to pieces, and then you don't get a kill. You see that in the kill feed then, or rather, well, for you on the bottom left, you then only get that you destroyed a vehicle. Then the crew bailed out, of course. That can backfire sometimes because they then swim over to you and start to blowtorch you to pieces or something. So whenever you don't get a kill, then the people have bailed out. You should keep that in mind because it has happened to me before that they then started to blowtorch all of a sudden. I took damage, and since the boat doesn't have much health, if two of them are blowtorching you, so to speak, you are not downed relatively quickly. But you know, you should also keep that in mind that people do that, meaning abandoning a sinking ship beforehand. Yeah, that was the video. I hope you liked it and it was helpful and informative. If you don't want to miss any more of those videos, here is the sub button. You should definitely press that. Here is also another video for you. You absolutely have to watch that because it is good. Plain and simple. I hope you're a better captains now, and write your differing opinions in the comments. We'll see us in the next video. Until then, bye.